Blue Origin rolls out the first stage of New Glenn's second flight. Inversion Space wants to quickly deliver cargo from space to anywhere on Earth. SpaceX is getting ready for Starship's 11th flight, and there's more news about space stations and lunar missions. As always, we've got all that and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. NASA just got another step closer to the launch of its Artemis II mission to send astronauts on a path around the moon for the first time since the Apollo program in the 1970s. Artemis II is currently set to launch no later than April of next year, with NASA actually aiming to fly as soon as February. Just last week, the agency stacked the Orion stage adapter on top of the mission's SLS rocket. As its name suggests, this piece of hardware connects the Orion spacecraft to the rocket's Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, or ICPS. But the stage adapter also serves two additional purposes. First, it'll protect Orion from hazardous gases produced during launch, and second, it also hosts some additional payloads, which it will deploy after separating from Orion. Artemis II will carry 4 12U CubeSats. Now, the 12U refers to a standard size based on a 10 by 10 by 10 centimeter cube called a unit, or U for short. To get to 12U, you stack them in 3 layers of 4 cubes for a shoebox-sized satellite. The 4 CubeSats on Artemis II are all provided by NASA's international partners. South Korea's KRAD cube uses a dosimeter to test the biological effects of space radiation throughout the Van Allen radiation belts. Meanwhile, Germany's Tacheles satellite will measure how the space environment affects electrical components. The result of this study will feed into the development of lunar vehicles. Argentina's contribution is called Atenea, and it will test various methods of radiation shielding. Additionally, it'll also validate a long-range communications link and collect GPS data to inform future mission designs. The fourth and final satellite installed on Artemis II's Orion stage adapter is a Saudi CubeSat on a mission to measure space weather at different distances from our home planet. The next step for the Artemis II mission is to complete the stack by adding the Orion, on top. NASA might get to this sometime in the next few weeks, and after that, the whole stack will undergo some testing to verify that the rocket and the spacecraft are ready for launch. Speaking of Orion, we recently learned that the capsule's manufacturer, Lockheed Martin, is exploring routes to launch the capsule for private missions. Now, this makes sense as the current administration wants to retire the current Artemis architecture after only a few missions, making Orion's future uncertain. But private missions would give Orion a reason to exist beyond Artemis, so Lockheed Martin is exploring a possible mission with the nonprofit BioAstra to perform biomedical research beyond Earth orbit. But I'll also note that this mission is still very early in its planning stage, and many changes, including a move to a different launch vehicle, will likely be necessary in order to make that happen. We've also got some news about a forthcoming robotic lunar explorer, Astrolab's FLIP rover. FLIP will launch on Astrobotic's Griffin lander in place of NASA's Viper rover. Last year, NASA canceled its Viper rover as they didn't have the budget to operate it, even though the rover itself was already finished. The agency then later uncanceled the mission and recently awarded Blue Origin a contract to deliver it to the moon instead. But all that aside, Viper's old spot on Griffin is now taken by FLIP, which Astrolab is now trying to ready for launch as soon as possible. The rover is far from complete at this time, but they are certainly making progress. In fact, recently, engineers at Astrolab turned on FLIP's avionics tray for the very first time, which contains all of the electronics needed to guide the rover around the moon. Next up, the company plans to subject the hardware to thermal vacuum testing to simulate the conditions that it'll have to deal with in space. Now, all of this is happening at an impressive pace as a result of the whole Viper situation. While the rover hasn't yet been completed, its launch date is set for no earlier than December of this year. But even if that gets delayed by a few months, the timeline will still be very impressive, as Astrolab and Astrobotic only announced their partnership in early February. That is a really short time to build a rover and get it to the moon. Astrobotic is also looking for ways to power its landers through the lunar night, and for that, it recently announced a partnership with the American branch of Japanese car maker Honda. The problem with the lunar night is that it's long, about 2 Earth weeks. That's a long time to go without solar power. Combine that with the frigid temperatures of lunar night resulting from the lack of atmosphere, and yeah, most spacecraft are just not designed to make it through something that hostile. But Honda may have the solution. The company designed a regenerative fuel cell, which during the day stores solar energy by converting water into hydrogen and oxygen. Then, during the night, it turns these products back into electricity, with the only byproduct being water. Astrobotic and Honda are now looking for ways to combine this technology with Astrobotic's solar arrays to power the company's lunar grid and customer payloads throughout the night. Now, these systems aren't ready for launch just yet. The companies will first conduct a feasibility study to verify the concept, part of which will be a simulation to see how the system would perform through a year-long mission at the lunar South Pole. If it all works, though, these systems could allow robotic lunar missions to operate for much longer and even enable long-duration human missions. Meanwhile, Firefly is also getting ready for testing ahead of its lunar mission. The company's Blue Ghost Mission 2 is set to launch to our celestial companion next year, but it won't go there alone. Blue Ghost will hitch a ride to the moon on the lunar variant of Firefly's Elytra space tug, which will also carry the European Space Agency's Lunar Pathfinder spacecraft for testing communications relay in lunar orbit. Firefly is now working on Elytra, and this week it installed a qualification article for the tug and its payload adapter on the structural test stand. There, Firefly plans to put the structure through its paces to test whether it can handle the forces from liftoff atop of Falcon 9 all the way to lunar orbit. Now, you might have noticed that we were away for a week, and that's because most of the This Week in Spaceflight team was traveling last week for NSF's UK-EU meetup in London, where they had a great time meeting some of you. But other than this little hiccup on our schedule, we publish these spaceflight updates every week. So if you'd like to stay up to date, subscribe to our channel. And if you think that YouTube should share our space news with even more space fans, give us a like to let the algorithm know. It really helps. Blue Origin rolled out the first stage booster for New Glenn's second flight this week. The booster left Blue Origin's assembly facility at Rocket Park and made its way to Launch Complex 36, where it'll be mated to the upper stage and perform an integrated hot-fire test of its 7 BE-4 engines. NSF's cameras caught the booster as it passed by the vehicle assembly building. And don't forget, you can see views like this 24 hours a day by visiting nsf.live/spacecoast. If everything goes to plan, this first stage will reignite its BE-4 engines on this next flight and attempt to make a propulsive landing on the deck of Blue Origin's drone ship, Jacqueline. The booster's predecessor, So You're Telling Me There's a Chance, was lost during its descent phase in January on New Glenn's otherwise successful maiden flight. Blue Origin CEO Dave Limp noted on social media that the odds of landing this particular booster are a lot better than 3,720 to 1. NASA's ESCAPADE satellites will be riding aboard the NG-2 mission, heading for Mars to study how the solar wind interacts with the planet's thin magnetic field. The twin probes, short for Escape and Plasma Acceleration and Dynamics Explorers, will fly in tandem around the red planet. They'll track the flow of energy and charged particles around Mars to reveal how the planet lost most of its atmosphere over time. Meanwhile, Blue Origin has been testing the BE-7 engines that will power its Blue Moon Mark 1 lunar lander. The test simulated the burn for the lander's full apogee raise maneuver, the one that will propel it towards the moon. The static fire ran for over 17 minutes, but don't worry, we won't play the whole thing no matter how much the team loves a good static fire. This test took place at the company's Giant Engine Experiment Facility in West Texas, which is their open-air or atmospheric test stand where engines are fired under real-world conditions rather than in a vacuum chamber. Now, the eagle-eyed among you will notice that the engine doesn't have a nozzle. That's deliberate. It lets engineers safely test ignition, throttling, fuel mixture, and combustion stability at ground level before adding the full nozzle for later tests in space-like conditions. In space, those large vacuum-optimized nozzles expand exhaust gases efficiently, but down here at sea level, the higher air pressure will cause what's called flow separation, adding turbulence and potentially damaging the nozzle. We recently reported that VAST had reached a milestone for its Haven 1 single-module space station, completing the final weld on the primary structure of its first flight hardware. The flight structure has now moved into a rigorous load and pressure testing campaign at the company's facility in Mojave, California, which its qualification article recently completed. But before it can bring the world's first commercial space station to orbit, VAST will launch Haven Demo. This will act as an in-orbit testbed to prove out critical technologies that'll be used on the space station. The craft will demonstrate core avionics, propulsion, and solar arrays that'll eventually fly on the Haven 1 module. VAST has reported that Haven Demo has completed its own testing campaign and is now in the final stages of integration for flight. These tests included thermal vacuum trials, checks for electromagnetic and radio frequency interference, and a good shake in the vibration testing facility to simulate the stresses and loads that the craft will be subjected to during launch. VAST has also shared views of its new Mission Control Center in Long Beach, California, with 24 operator stations and a large video wall. It won't be long before this room is monitoring live video feeds and data from the first Haven missions. In other commercial space station news, Northrop Grumman has successfully demonstrated the autonomous rendezvous and docking system that'll one day allow its Cygnus spacecraft to connect directly with Starlab in orbit. Starlab is a next-generation, privately built commercial space station being developed by Voyager and Airbus, along with other partners. It'll serve astronauts, researchers, and industry in low Earth orbit, and Starlab plans to launch the station aboard Starship towards the end of the decade. Starship is currently the only vehicle that could launch the station module size and mass in one shot. For this groundbreaking test, engineers adapted a Cygnus cargo vehicle, the craft that periodically resupplies the International Space Station, and proved that it could locate, approach, and dock with the target without any manual control. The system used onboard sensors and guidance software to automatically perform all of the necessary maneuvers to track and align with the docking port. It's a key capability for the next generation of commercial stations like Starlab, which will need to host visiting vehicles and modules without constant human oversight. The successful demonstration shows that Cygnus, or a derivative of it, could serve as a reliable logistics vehicle once the station is operational. Starlab also recently announced a strategic partnership with a new European partner, Space Application Services, often abbreviated to SpaceApps. The Belgium-based company specializes in payload integration, avionics, and mission operations. SpaceApps will also become an equity investor in Starlab, extending its capabilities in payload hosting and mission control as the company moves from design to operational reality. Well, since Starlab will be launched by Starship eventually, I guess now's as good a time as any to catch up on the preparations for Starship's next launch. Starship Flight 11 is scheduled to launch no earlier than this Monday, October 13th at 18:15 local time, or 23:15 UTC. Now, I'm sure all of you watching right now are already up to speed with what to expect on Flight 11, thanks to our latest Starbase update episode, which was released a few days ago, but there are still a number of steps that have to be completed ahead of launch, and SpaceX has already checked off some of those since that episode. For instance, the Super Heavy booster for that flight, Booster 15, is already at the launch site and installed on the launch mount. This vehicle rolled out on Wednesday morning and has been there ever since. SpaceX has since been preparing everything for flight by removing the scaffolding on top of the launch mount and removing the booster guiding pins on the deck of the mount, which are used during the installation of boosters via the chopsticks. Since these will no longer be needed, these pins always get removed ahead of launch so they don't get damaged during liftoff. So right now, we're pretty much just waiting on the ship 38, to come out of Megabay 2 and roll to the launch site. The pad and the booster are ready, the ship is almost there too, and from a regulatory standpoint, SpaceX should be clear for Starship Flight 11. Since this flight won't feature any major deviations from the plan for Flight 10, this means that SpaceX can fly Starship using the same launch license used on that launch. In recent days, we've also seen several hazard notices released to alert boats and aircraft of the launch in the different ascent and entry areas across the globe. So hopefully, everything should be in place and ready to go for a Starship launch on Monday, assuming that the weather cooperates. Now, that is the one thing that we can talk about all we want, but we really can't do anything about. And it really gave SpaceX a headache on the last flight. So we are already crossing our fingers and toes for good weather. Please. Now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting with Inversion Space. The US-based company has unveiled its new space-based delivery vehicle, ARC, which aims to deliver cargo anywhere on Earth in under an hour. The name is inspired by the vehicle being autonomous, reusable, and low cost. Measuring 2.4 by 1.2 meters, it's designed to serve as a rapid delivery system for customers like the military who require cargo or assets at short notice in remote or hard-to-reach environments. The vehicle is designed to remain in orbit for up to 5 years and uses parachutes at the end of its descent for an accurate touchdown. Inversion's long-term plan will see thousands of ARC spacecraft in low Earth orbit acting as an orbital warehouse. SpaceX launched its predecessor, Ray, aboard the Transporter 12 mission in January. This acted as a pathfinder for ARC, testing key technologies, though it was unable to perform a re-entry due to a propulsion issue. Ray was developed for under $1 million with a team of 25 people, emphasizing the company's drive to develop reusable systems at low cost. Beyond cargo delivery, ARC is also capable of maneuvering at over 20 times the speed of sound, making it an attractive testbed for hypersonic testing. Inversion plans to fly ARC's first mission sometime next year, and you can be sure that we'll be following their progress on their journey to orbit. Astronomers have made some fascinating new discoveries about the interstellar comet 3I Atlas as it continues to approach our sun, including clear evidence of water. Using telescopes in Hawaii and Chile, scientists detected the chemical fingerprints of water ice and its breakdown products in the comet's glowing tail. Ultraviolet spectroscopy from NASA then confirmed that 3I Atlas is releasing about 40 kilograms of water vapor every second, a sure sign of an active comet. We've seen hints of water before on another interstellar visitor, 2I Borisov, back in 2019, but this is the first time we've spotted it so clearly and from much farther out where sunlight shouldn't be strong enough to melt the ice. 3I Atlas is only the third interstellar object that we've observed passing through our solar system, so finding water offers a rare glimpse into how familiar ingredients, like water, are scattered between the stars. The comet passed by Mars on October 3rd when two of the European Space Agency's Mars orbiters were able to get their closest views. The Mars Express and ExoMars Trace Gas orbiters turned their cameras to the comet from 30 million kilometers away, revealing a developing tail. Images from NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter have yet to be released, but this comet is currently thought to be 1 to 5 kilometers wide, rotating once every 16 hours, a gentle spin compared to most comets. It continues to brighten as it nears its closest point to the Sun, or perihelion, on October 29th. It's already within reach of amateur telescopes, but will pass behind the Sun in late October. When it reappears in November, it's likely to be too faint to see with the human eye, but we'll still have eyes on it. ESA's Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, or JUICE, will observe it from afar as it continues on its hyperbolic orbit out of our solar system. Those images should reach us by next February. The comet will make its closest approach to Earth around December 16th, giving astronomers one last opportunity to study this rare interstellar visitor before it heads back out into deep space. Astra has shared a video of its most recent static fire, which lasted around 10 seconds. This demonstrated the company's most powerful first-stage engine, two of which will power Astra's upcoming Rocket 4. Known as Chiron, the engine is a modified version of Firefly's Rover engine, which burns liquid kerosene and liquid oxygen as propellants. Astra acquired the rights to the design in 2021 and has modified it further with customized control over gimbaling, thrust, and engine mix. Rocket 4 is designed as a medium-lift, highly mobile system that will fit into standard shipping containers for transport. This makes it ideal for rapid response missions without the need for massive infrastructure and opens up the potential to launch from spaceports such as those in Alaska, Australia, New Zealand, or Canada. Astra is positioning the vehicle as a choice for payloads that sit between Rocket Lab's Electron and rideshare missions on the likes of a Falcon 9, which it wants to directly compete with at around $5 million per launch. The company has plans to debut the rocket next summer from the Cape in Florida before moving on to its first mission for the U.S. Department of Defense by the end of next year. The company was awarded a contract worth up to $44 million last October, which supported scaling up production of what Astra calls its Launch System 2. Meanwhile, Spanish launch provider PLD Space has begun the engine qualification campaign for its second-stage engine that'll power the upper stage of its Miura 5 rocket. This is the vacuum-optimized version of the company's Teprel C engine, 5 of which will power the first stage of the vehicle. The test was conducted at PLD's own test facilities in Teruel, Spain, where the company also performed structural testing of the first stage booster. PLD Space just passed the second anniversary of its suborbital Miura 1 mission in October 2023. The maiden launch of the first private European rocket. Unlike the simpler pressure-fed engines of that flight, these new engines add turbopumps and more complexity, as PLD founder and CEO Raul Torres recently told NSF.
I would say that both engine qualification and staging are going to be the trickiest paths to orbit.
The long-term plan is for the Miura 5 to be partially reusable, reigniting the engines on its first stage for a propulsive landing back at the pad. PLD Space aims to begin construction of a new dedicated launch pad at the European spaceport in French Guiana next June, which it hopes will be ready by the end of the year. In the meantime, we're looking forward to seeing more engine testing soon, as Miura 5 continues taking steps towards its maiden launch. This is your weekly space traffic report provided by Next Spaceflight. In the 2 weeks since our last episode, we've seen 8 orbital launches. SpaceX launched 4 missions carrying internet satellites for, you guessed it, SpaceX's own Starlink constellation. We also had 4 missions from China in late September. A Changzheng 4C launched a meteorological satellite from Zhochuan. A Changzheng 6A launched 5 communications satellites for the Chinese government from Taiwan. And a Changzheng 2D lofted a pair of satellites with unknown Earth observation testing purposes into low Earth orbit from Xichang. We also had 2 suborbital missions. Just under half an hour after midnight UTC on October 1st, Rocket Lab launched a mission called Justin from NASA's Wallops Flight Facility. The mission was flown by the suborbital variant of Electron known as HASTE. Finally, Blue Origin launched its 15th human mission on New Shepard. The rocket carried 6 passengers to just over 100 kilometers and back, lifting off from Blue's launch site 1 in West Texas. Flying on this mission were Jeff Elgin, Dana Karagasova, Will Lewis, Aaron Newman, Vitaly Ostrovsky, and Clint Kelly III, who had previously flown on New Shepard's NS-22 mission in August of 2022. They all got to enjoy a few minutes of microgravity and great views of the West Texas desert from above. Since we've now arrived in October, it's time for some statistics. Throughout September, we had a total of 30 launch attempts, 1 per day on average, which means that was the busiest month in spaceflight history. Of those 30 launches, 16 were aboard SpaceX's Falcon 9. As usual, SpaceX was followed by China, which launched 10 times this month. Now, we could actually count 31 missions for September instead of 30, as there was a failed launch from Iran this month. But we only count orbital missions for these stats, and we don't know whether it was supposed to reach orbit or not. But either way, it never got that far, so it doesn't really make much of a difference in the end. Next week looks to be a busy one, with 7 launches currently scheduled. Falcon 9 is slated to fly 4 missions. One of them will lift off from California to launch military communications satellites for the Space Force's Tranche 1 Transport Layer constellation. Another will launch a batch of internet satellites for Amazon's Kuiper network into orbit from Florida. And the final 2 Falcon 9s will each launch a Starlink mission from Florida as well. If the current schedule holds, the second mission will also set 2 records. Not only will the booster become the very first to fly 31 times, it'll also carry the 10,000th Starlink satellite. Over in New Zealand, an Electron is set to take off from Rocket Lab's own launch complex to launch another synthetic aperture radar satellite for Japan's Synspective. The mission is dubbed Owl New World. We'll also have a couple of missions from China. A Yinli 1, also known as Gravity 1, from Orion Space, is set to lift off from a launch platform stationed off the coast of China. Later in the week, we'll also have a Changzheng 8A launch from the commercial side of Wenchang. But of course, the main event next week will be Starship's Flight 11. The booster for this mission is already sitting on the pad, and if all goes well, it might fly as soon as Monday, October 13th. As always, keep an eye on our Next Spaceflight app and website for updates. It's a great resource for the latest info on launches, and it's completely free. And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. I'm Elysia Segal for NSF, and we'll see you all again next week to recap this week in spaceflight.